Welcome everyone. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, I have my glasses, but I don't know if I will see your fingers. I would like you to rate your experience with tech tutorials in general. So I want to see your fingers. 1, if you're not confident with tech tutorials in general, if you're not happy with what you read, and 10, if it's so easy for you, it's just a piece of cake. So let me see your, oh, really? Okay, in there and that. Thank you, that's fair enough. So, Jenkins tutorials used to be like assembling IKEA furniture without instructions. You've all been through that. But frankly, it was even worse than that. It was like assembling IKEA furniture with the correct instruction, but written in Swedish, backwards, and you have your hand tied behind your back, and the only tool you have is a hammer. Yeah, it was frustrating and likely to end in tears. As engineers, sometimes we forget what it is to be a beginner. So we watch tutorials that feel more like riddles wrapped inside mysteries, inside enigmas. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt and the headache. So let's now have a look at the comparison between the two tutorials for Maven. So the tutorial after the revamp is on dark mode on the left, and the tutorial before the revamp is light mode on the right. So as you can see, the only thing that changed is a dark mode. It now feels so much better, right? Thanks for your attention. Have a nice day. No, just kidding, of course. Do you see how much we have to scroll on the right side? It's like a never-ending story. You see how much code the user has to copy and paste to get the tutorial to work. Of course, we'll have about the same amount of code when it comes to the Jenkins pipeline itself, but the setup process should be as simple as possible, and that's not the case on the right. Let's make another comparison now, this time with only the setup process. So let's see how many steps we have to set up Jenkins with Docker commands on the right and with Docker Compose on the left. So pay attention to the scroll bars, the number of commands, and the complexity of the setup process. Okay, there we go. We're gone past half the screen on the right side, and we haven't started the Jenkins tutorial itself. Now, on the left side with Docker Compose, you see there is just a tiny bit of scrolling, and you're good to go. So, did you spot any big chunk of code to copy-paste? I guess not. Nada. There is no. And I think the video speaks for itself, right? The example on the right is the kind of experience we're trying to leave behind. And today I want to show you how we transform that into something welcoming, inclusive, and dare I say, fun. So I showed you the Maven tutorial, but the other ones were just as bad. They were like a puzzle with missing pieces, a maze with no exit, a Rubik's Cube with no solution. You get the picture. So why so much pain and dazzle, you may ask? First of all, don't you see the length of this tutorial that aims to guide you into building a simple Maven app with Jenkins? Don't you think it's ridiculous? It's so long. I know, of course, you've already done some tutorials that were longer than that. So you're pretty confident if you're a beginner that you'll make it to the end. It's long, but it's not the main problem, because there is more. Docker. Yeah, of course, even the newcomers know Docker. They've tried it once or twice, it's installed on their machine, but they're not a Docker expert. And that should not be a problem, right? We're here to learn about Jenkins, not about Docker, so all should go fine, right? Right? Wrong! The tutorial assumes you're a Docker guru, and is throwing Docker commands at you that there is no tomorrow. You're lost, you're confused, you're frustrated, and you're asking yourself, why do I feel so dumb today? You're not dumb, my friend. You're just a victim of a tutorial that was written by experts for experts, forgetting that not everyone is an expert. So the old Jenkins tutorial made lots of assumptions, especially that users had a strong understanding of Docker. But let me ask you, how many of you knew Docker really well the first time you tried Jenkins? No, not you, Olivier. Nobody? Oh, somehow, more or less. Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I was expecting, of course, because the tutorial assumed that you were already fluent in Docker commands, even before touching Jenkins, and that's not a fair expectation. The process to spin up a Jenkins controller and agent left the newcomers in the dark, with no clue where to start. Even I, who was already familiar with CI/CD pipelines and Docker, I found myself puzzled by the number of commands required. I thought I knew Docker until I saw how it was used in the tutorials. If I felt this way, imagine how someone completely new to that would feel. A little bit of GitLog would have shown us who were the brilliant minds that created these tutorials, but that's not the point. I'm not there to name names. I'm here to tell you that these tutorials were outdated, overly complex, and essentially a barrier to entry for many potential users. And when I say brilliant, I mean it. I'm not being sarcastic. There is no pun intended there. Even the most brilliant minds can sometimes forget what it is to be a beginner. And these tutorials were the gateway to a world of possibilities, but they were locked behind a door that required a secret handshake that only a few knew. So we needed to change that, and we did. But before that change, you should not trust me, you should see it for yourself. So let's take a look at the Maven tutorial in depth, as it was before we started revamping it. So, why do we need a Docker network? It would be so much simpler with a Docker Compose, right? I mean, maybe at the time of the tutorial was written, Docker Compose was still in infancy, but still, it would have been so much simpler. And Docker in Docker, really? Why do we need Docker to run inside Docker? It's like Inception, but with containers. And it's considered to be a very bad practice, security-wise, and yet it was part of the tutorial. Why? Just because it was the only way to make it work with the existing setup. Look at all these options on the command line. Yes, of course, there is an explanation for all of them, but we have no idea why we have to use them. Do you really need to know all of them before starting with Jenkins? The lack of contextual guidance left users executing command without understanding why, which can be intimidating and counterproductive. So, is it all? No, it gets worse. Newcomers have to create a Dockerfile, build an image locally, and then run it with once more tons of command line options. Come on, we're here to learn Jenkins and not Docker, right? And yet we are spending more time with Docker than with Jenkins. And last but not least, you have 3 sections about accessing the container, the logs, and the home directory. Do you really need to know all of this to get started with Jenkins? I mean, it's good to know, but it's not mandatory, right? It is. With this setup, it is. Because to unlock Jenkins, with Docker or any other kind of installation, you have to find the initial admin password, and it's hidden in the logs, and you have to access the logs to find it. And to access the logs, you have to access the container. That's why we have these 3 sections. It's a chain reaction, and it all started with a choice of a setup. It's like a domino effect, but with tutorials. And the rest of the tutorial about Docker is creating an administrator, how to stop, restart the Jenkins controller and agent. But the tutorial itself begins there, and only there. So it's pretty late, I would say. We're at the middle of the page when we start talking about the Maven tutorial itself. So that's a lot of Docker for Jenkins tutorial, don't you think? And frankly, I was kind of exhausted when I finished the tutorial for the first time, with lots of questions in my mind about the Docker setup. And I was not ready to start learning Jenkins. I was ready to take a nap with a headache. There was another problem with this tutorial. We were heavily relying on an outdated plugin called Blue Ocean. Outdated, deprecated, not recommended anymore, whatever. It was not such a good idea to keep it. So, you got it, the high technical level of the tutorials inadvertently excluded those who could have greatly benefited from a more approachable introduction to Jenkins. And this not only limited the user base of Jenkins users, but also missed an opportunity to foster a more inclusive community. And the complexity of the tutorials acted as a gatekeeper, making Jenkins seems like a tool only for the very technically proficient, rather than a tool that could be accessible to developers at all levels. So, what could we do to change that? Have more approachable tutorials, of course, but how? Damien Duportal, the Jenkins infrastructure officer, had the gut feeling and the technical skills to feel that the use of Docker Compose could simplify the tutorials. Mark Waite, one of our board members, accompanied so many newcomers that he knew the pain they were feeling. He also wanted to get rid of Docker in Docker and simplify the tutorial. And I, with my technical background on CI/CD, GitPod, Docker, but relatively new to Jenkins, had the fresh perspective and a nice toolset needed to identify the unnecessary complexities that might intimidate newcomers. So, you got it, we chose to use Docker Compose to simplify the tutorials, get rid of Docker in Docker, and make the tutorials more accessible, hopefully, with this tool. So, the old tutorials were a barrier rather than a bridge, and our goal was to make sure that the new tutorials helped users, regardless of their level of expertise. But would we let, once more, users copy and paste lots of code, build their images, and run their containers? Not exactly. So, after a lot of reflection and feedback, we realized that we needed to simplify the entire setup process, and that's where Docker Compose came in. Rather to force users to deal with long, very long Docker commands, Docker Compose allowed us to manage everything with a single command. So from my onboarding in 2022 to the beginning of the GSOC project in 2023, I spent a lot of time discussing these tutorials with Damien and Mark. So I created a repo outside of the Jenkins organization. I created a few Dockerfiles for the Jenkins controller, the agent. I learned how to push images on Docker Hub. I installed the result controller and agent on my machine and on GitPod, all thanks to Docker Compose. So I was able during that to see the culprits, the traps, but also discover good practices in Docker Compose, specific use on environment variables for Jenkins, and some limitations of Docker Compose itself. I was also able to install automation on the repo to build the images and to push them on Docker Hub, and to keep them up to date thanks to tools like Dependabot or the famous Update CLI by Olivier. Yeah. So, yeah. Glory at last. So all of these prerequisites, that was nice for the tutorials revamped, so we could be more efficient when the time would come, the time of the GSOC project. So I won't say I was a puppet in the hands of Damien and Mark, but I was more like a sponge, absorbing all the knowledge they were sharing with me and trying to make sense of it all. But don't get me wrong, I discovered a few things along the path, and even them learned a few things from me. The main goal was to prepare the ground for the GSOC project, and we did it. So I gave you the name of Docker Compose without really justifying it. And once again, it was an evidence for the seasoned Jenkins developers, and even for me. So why Docker Compose? Because it was the only tool that could encapsulate the complexity of the Jenkins controller and agent setup and make it accessible to newcomers. Frankly, which other tool dealing with containers could allow to start a Jenkins controller and agent with a single command? Come on, I'm waiting. No, please don't say Kubernetes. Okay, that's what I thought. So, the beauty of Docker Compose is that it manages multiple containers and dependencies for you. We wanted Jenkins to feel, Jenkins newcomers to feel like it's easy to build Jenkins, Let's forget about building IKEA furniture with obscure instruction, and let's go with something that looks like Lego, putting just together Lego blocks. Simple, clear, mostly foolproof. So with the old tutorial on the right, you had to manually configure every container. You were expected to pull various Docker images, run long commands, deal with configuration file, and build your own image. And that's a lot for anyone new to Jenkins. And with Docker Compose on the left, you clone a simple repo, and with one command, Docker Compose ---- profile, Maven, Python, whatever, up -d, you have Jenkins and its agent running in minutes. No more manual setup, no more long list of Docker commands. Now, let me take a moment to acknowledge the collaborative effort behind this revamp. We didn't do it alone. Our Google Summer of Code participant, Ashutosh Saxena, played a critical role. Ashutosh wasn't an expert in Jenkins. That's exactly what we needed. A newcomer's perspective to help us identify the pain points we were too close to see. So working with Ashutosh, we identified issues in the tutorials that we as experienced engineers had missed. Docker Compose was also new to him, and so were the challenges of building Docker images for multiple CPU platforms. He also had to learn GitPod, which allowed us to make Jenkins accessible to users even without powerful hardware. And his fresh perspective helped us refine the tutorials in a way we hadn't considered. So one of the main challenges for Ashutosh was creating Docker images that work both for x86 and ARM64 architectures. So with Docker's BuildX tool, we ensured compatibility across platforms. And the use of Docker profiles also added flexibility, making it easier for users to customize their environment. So for Maven, Python, Node, whatever. So collaborating with Ashutosh reminded us that sometimes the best solution comes from fresh perspectives. By iterating and testing with a newcomer, we made Jenkins tutorial far more inclusive. And the result of all this work is, at least to me, a Jenkins experience that's more inclusive than ever. First, we ensured multi-architecture support, allowing Jenkins to run smoothly on both x86 and ARM64 devices. So if you ever have a PC or a Mac, that will work out of the box. And second, we integrated Jenkins with GitPod. This means that even users with less powerful machines can run Jenkins directly from their browser. Whether you're on a Chromebook, a tablet, or even a car entertainment system, Jenkins is just a browser tab away. Okay, that may sound too good to be true, but it's for real, and it's demo time. Okay, I didn't know how the network would be today, so yes, you can call me a chicken, but I have a video instead of a demo to show you how to start Jenkins at GitPod. No live demo. And speaking of chicken, I forgot to sacrifice one before the presentation to the demo gods, so a video is mandatory in this case. So let's have a look now at how is it easy to start Jenkins with GitPod. So in the README file of the repo, you have a link to start Jenkins on GitPod. So whenever you hop on the repo, you can start Jenkins with GitPod with one click. And by the way, the account of GitPod is free, and you can use it for 50 hours per month. I also have installed the GitPod Chrome extension, so I can start Jenkins on GitPod with one click on the big green button there. And by the way, as we are speaking about inclusivity, the bandwidth is on GitPod, not on the newcomer's machine. The Jenkins Docker images aren't big, but you never know what kind of connectivity the newcomer has. They could be in a train, in a car, in a remote area, in a country where the connectivity is not that great. And that's why GitPod is a great tool for inclusivity. But anyway, I clicked on the button and got access to something that looks like an IDE, like Visual Studio Code, and a terminal. You can see that you have some instructions on the bottom, and a command to copy-paste in the terminal once you have chosen the tutorial you want to go through. So we have there Maven, Node, Python, multi. So let's just copy-paste the command in the terminal, and we're good to go. So the Docker images are being pulled. That's pretty fast and not consuming my bandwidth. The Jenkins controller and agent are being started. A browser tab is opened. And Jenkins is starting. There we go. Ain't that cool? We just click on one button and put one command in the command line. In less than what? 1 minute? So you don't have any admin password to find, and we'll be able to log in with admin and start the tutorial for real. So let's make the window bigger. And let's click on the login link. So it's a tutorial, so admin is plenty strong enough. So as you can see, we already have a job available and an agent on the left. We can build the job again. And have a look at the logs. So I know the job doesn't do much, but it's there to show the user can have a controller and agent working and that the agent is connected. The plugins are already up to date. We're running the latest LTS, at least at the time of the recording. So the user doesn't have any admin work. It just works. That's pretty cool. The user can then focus on the tutorial and only on the tutorial. And that's the goal, right? So you have it working Jenkins in less than 2 minutes without having installed anything. You're still in your browser. That sounds pretty cool to me. So as you may have seen with the GitPod information in the terminal, we also introduced Docker Compose profiles for different languages and technologies. So whether you're working with Maven, Python, Node, all it takes is a simple profile switch. We also have Android and Go, which is not shown there. You just have to enter Docker Compose -- profile, the technology you're interested in, up -D, and you're good to go. You have a working Jenkins in your browser. So Inclusivity was at the core of this revamp, and by supporting multiple architectures and making Jenkins accessible via GitPod, we've removed barriers to entry for all developers, no matter their level or hardware. Remember the comparison of the old experience with the new one. So the old process required multiple steps, commands, configuration files. It was a nightmare for beginners. And now it's one command, one tool, and everything is ready to go. Since launching the new tutorials, our Docker images have been downloaded over 20,000 times. We've seen multiple forks of the project with people using it for their own Jenkins instance for other technologies. We also see regular clones that prove people are using our tutorials. And the referring sites are, of course, Jenkins.io, but also Reddit, Medium, and also come from Google searches. So the impact has been clear. The new tutorials are not just easier, they are being adopted widely with thousands of users benefiting from the changes we've made. But did we miss any of our targets? We wanted to get rid of a complex setup. Is that the case? Yes, it is. We wanted to get rid of Docker in Docker. Did we make it? Yes, for sure. We wanted to stop using Blue Ocean while not giving a worse experience to users. So, did we find any replacement? Fortunately, yes. The tutorial was rewritten thanks to a new plugin called the Pipeline Graph View. So it looks like we killed 3 birds with 1 stone, right? Okay, I mean, that's a pretty terrible way to celebrate a success, except if these birds are chicken, right? So you might feel like we've only focused on the technical aspects, creating a repo, building Docker images, providing access to a GitPod workspace. But what about the documentation itself? Because even though modifying the documentation was the last step of our journey, it was by far the most visible, useful, and impactful part. All the prior efforts, the GSOC projects, and the months spent building a stable solution, all of that were aimed at one goal: make our tutorial more inclusive and more user-friendly. And we didn't just remove a barrier, we built a bridge. The work doesn't stop here. We are constantly looking for ways to improve Jenkins, and that's where you come in. Whether you're a seasoned developer or a complete newcomer, your feedback is invaluable. We also, of course, have plans to refine the tutorials. We'll add some more flexibility and we'll improve support for even more platforms. But we need the help of the Jenkins community to maintain this momentum. So I encourage all of you to dive into the new tutorials, give them a try, and tell us what you think. Your contributions, whether in the form of code, feedback, or ideas, are what keep Jenkins moving forward. Remember that IKEA analogy. Jenkins tutorials used to feel like assembling furniture with the wrong tools. Now it's like snapping together Lego blocks. Simple, fun, and most importantly, accessible to everyone. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any question if ever we still have time. Oh, maybe one over there.
When simplifying the setup process, did you have also principles that what you don't want to simplify away? For example, you could probably do everything as one horribly long bash script that takes care of everything, and just say the users, hey, run this blindly, and you have Jenkins. But obviously, you didn't do that, and that's a good thing, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you. No. In fact, I have a tendency to do those kind of horrible hacks most of the time. Let's do a big bash script with everything hidden from the user, and hopefully it will work. But I was not allowed to. So no. Definitely, it was something we wanted people to trust. So we had to do something, not a bash script. For example, whenever people install Docker, they just run a bash they get from Docker. And for other technologies, it frightens me and other people in the team. So no, we don't do that. No, we don't do that. No, we don't do that anymore. Okay. But no, that was something we wanted to be as simple as possible. And you speak of bash. We could have done something also for Windows, for macOS, whatever. But it would have been so much more work. And frankly, I'm not that bad at writing bash script. But when it comes to Windows script, I'm not there anymore. So Docker Compose was the right way to target all the platforms we wanted to work for. Thank you. It looks like we're done. Thanks a lot for your attention.